Mom, what if Bianca finds out? By the time she wakes up, you'll already be at the airport. But she worked for this for 3 years. This is your chance. And now it's your turn to enjoy it. What are we going to tell her? Nothing. Some girls are born to struggle, others are born to escape it.
The morning Bianca discovered her documents were gone, she did not scream. She stood at her drawer for a very long time. The empty drawer, the one she had opened every night for 3 years just to confirm they were still there. And she breathed. Slowly. The way you breathe when something inside you knows that if you stop being deliberate, if you let the air come and go on its own terms, you will collapse and not get up. The visa was gone. The acceptance letter was gone. The program documents, the health certificate, the bank confirmation, the 3 years of careful, quiet, invisible preparation. All of it gone. As if it had never existed. As if she had dreamed the whole thing. Vanessa's room was empty. Her bed was made, badly, quickly, the cover thrown rather than smoothed. Her best shoes were missing from the rack. Her big travel bag was not under the bed where it always lived. Bianca stood in the doorway of her stepsister's room and understood everything. She walked to her stepmother's door and knocked. Veronica opened it already dressed, full makeup, wrapper pressed. The face of a woman who had been awake for hours preparing for exactly this moment.
My documents are gone. Good morning to you too.
Bianca Cole was 23 years old and had been carrying her father's household since she was 16. Not because anyone asked, because the alternative was watching it fall, and Bianca could not watch things fall when she had hands to hold them. That was her nature, her mother's nature. People said, the ones who remembered her mother. The same quiet strength, the same refusal to make noise about difficult things, the same way of absorbing pressure that would have broken others and converting it through internal alchemy nobody could fully explain into forward motion. Her mother had died when Bianca was 9. Breast cancer, found late, progressed fast. Bianca remembered her in fragments, the smell of her perfume, the sound of her sewing machine late at night, a particular way she had of cupping Bianca's face in both hands when she wanted her to listen carefully. She had cupped Bianca's face the last week she was coherent and said,
You are more than this house, Bianca, more than this neighborhood. Don't let anyone make you small.
I won't, Mama.
Richard Cole had remarried 2 years later. Veronica was elegant and certain and made their compound look more prosperous than it was. She brought Vanessa, 11 years old, already beautiful, already performing beauty consciously. She redecorated the sitting room. She replaced the curtains Bianca's mother had sewn. She rearranged the kitchen so completely that Bianca could not find anything for a month. She never hit Bianca. She never called her names in front of witnesses. She simply subtracted her from conversations, from consideration, from the category of people whose comfort required attention. It was done so smoothly, so consistently, so dressed in the language of practicality and resource management that Richard could always find a way to believe it was not happening. Bianca understood early that she was on her own, so she organized herself accordingly. She woke at 5 every morning, cooked, cleaned, did the marketing because Veronica found the markets beneath her, managed the family's grocery budget with a precision that stretched it further than anyone knew it could go. She also, quietly from the age of 17, bought and resold fabric, small quantities at first, from her school uniform allowance, then larger quantities as her eye for quality and her reputation for reliability grew. By 20, she had a small but steady client base among the market women who needed dependable fabric sourced without the stress of going to Aba themselves. She saved every spare naira in an envelope in her drawer for a dream she told almost no one about. The compound noticed Bianca. The neighbors knew her name before they knew Vanessa's. They greeted her first at the borehole. They sent their daughters to her when they needed advice about fabric. Mama Obiora next door once said loudly enough to carry through walls that Bianca was the kind of girl who would become something. Just you watch. Veronica had heard that through the wall. Her face had not changed, but something behind her eyes had. The dream had begun the day Bianca found the broker. She had been at the state library. One of her Saturday habits, The free ones, the ones nobody could charge her for. When she found it between two returned books, someone had left it by accident or by intention. International Entrepreneurship Development Program. Applications open to young business owners across West Africa. 12 months abroad. Business training, mentorship, seed funding for graduates. Bianca had read it 3 times sitting at the library table. Then she had folded it carefully and put it in her notebook. That was 3 years before the morning she stood at Veronica's door. 3 years of business courses taken online at the library. 3 years of application revisions, interview preparations, document gathering. 3 years of saving the application fee in 20 naira increments when necessary. She had told no one while the process was ongoing, not because she was secretive by nature, but because she had learned early that hope shown too soon in this house became a target. She told her father the evening the approval email arrived. She had printed it at the business center on Okeke Street. She came home with the printout in her hand and her face doing something it did not usually do, open, unguarded, lit from somewhere inside. She had sat down across from her father in the parlor and placed the letter on the table between them. Richard Cole read it slowly. He read it twice. Then he looked up at his daughter, really looked, the way he did not always manage to, and his eyes were met. Wet. Bianca, he said. Just her name. But the way he said it, she had allowed herself in that moment to feel it. The thing she had been careful about for years, pride, not performed for anyone, real, clean, private pride. The kind that comes from knowing what something cost. Veronica had been in the kitchen doorway. Vanessa had been in the corridor. Bianca had not noticed either of them. That was the last mistake she made in that house. My documents are gone, Bianca said again at Veronica's door.
My documents are gone. Vanessa's things are gone. Her room looks like she left before sunrise. Vanessa is a grown woman. She comes and goes. With my visa. That is a serious accusation, Bianca.
Bianca looked at her stepmother's face, the careful, pleasant, impenetrable face, and felt something settle in her chest like a stone. Not surprised. She was not surprised. She was something worse than surprised. She was confirmed. She went to her father's room. Richard was sitting on the edge of the bed, already dressed, hands clasped between his knees, not looking at anything in particular, the posture of a man who was not asleep, but also not quite present.
Papa,
Bianca said,
do you know where my documents are?
A long pause. He looked up slowly. In his eyes, she saw it. The thing she had feared since the night she showed him the letter. He knew. Not everything. Maybe, but enough. She could see the knowing sitting behind his eyes like furniture. He was pretending wasn't there. These things sometimes get misplaced, he said carefully. The stone in her chest became something heavier. Papa, her voice was very quiet. Do you know where my documents are? He looked back at her, at his hands. We can look into replacements. These things can be redone. She left the room. By the time she got to the corridor, Veronica was behind her, voice pitched low and urgent for the benefit of the neighbors whose windows face their compound. This is what you do? Accuse your family instead of checking your own careless arrangements. You left documents in an unlocked drawer and now it is everyone else's fault. I know what happened, Bianca said. You know nothing. You assume. You have always been dramatic. Mama Obiora, Bianca called, loudly, calmly through the compound gate. Silence. Mama Obiora appeared at her window. Did you see anyone leave this compound before sunrise today? Bianca asked. Mama Obiora looked at Bianca, looked at Veronica, looked back at Bianca. I don't want trouble, Mama Obiora said, which was its own kind of answer. Veronica's pleasant face cracked for exactly 1 second, a flash of something cold and precise beneath, and then recomposed. You will never be satisfied in this family, Veronica said softly. This is the truth. Some people are not built for gratitude. Bianca picked up her bag from the hook by the front door. She took the envelope of savings from her drawer, the one they had not found, the one she had kept stitched into the lining of her old school bag for exactly this kind of emergency. Because she had always known, somewhere deep and practical, that there might be an emergency. She walked out of the compound. She did not look back. This was not because she was not breaking. She was breaking. She walked the first 2 streets by force of will alone, her vision blurring, her breath coming in the shallow, rapid way it came when she was fighting something enormous. She turned into the narrow street behind Okeke Market, where nobody knew her well enough to watch, and she sat down on a block of concrete outside a closed provision store. and she pressed both hands flat against her thighs and breathed. In, out, in, out. Then she stood up and kept walking. The room she found was in Ogui new layout. One small room in a face me I face you compound. She shared bathroom, no kitchen, a window that looked directly at a wall. The landlord wanted 3 months up front. She negotiated to 2. It cleaned out most of the envelope. She had 6,000 naira left. No income, no connections in this part of the city, no one who was coming. She found casual work, carrying goods at the market, data entry for a printing shop, selling phone credits from a tray on the street for a commission that barely covered her evening meal. She applied for jobs she was overqualified for and was turned down because she did not have the right connections, or because the position had already been given to someone's relative, or because the man interviewing her wanted something she was not going to give. She went to bed hungry more nights than she counted. The worst night was a Tuesday in October, 6 weeks after she had left. Rain so heavy the roof of her room leaked in 2 places, and she had pushed her only good clothes to the center of the room to keep them dry. She had been rejected from a clerical position that morning. She had not eaten since the previous afternoon. She was wet and cold, and the compound smelled of mildew, and someone else's argument was leaking through the tin wall beside her. She went to her bag, her old school bag, the emergency one. She reached past the hidden envelope pocket, past the notebooks, to the inner section where she kept small things. She pulled out what she found, a faded photograph. Her mother, at 20-something, standing in front of a market stall, fabric draped over one arm, laughing at something happening off camera, completely alive, completely herself. Bianca sat on the damp floor of that leaking room and looked at her mother's face and cried for the first time since the morning she had walked out of her father's compound. She cried for a long time, ugly, exhausted crying, the kind that happens when the body finally insists on releasing what the mind has been managing too long. When it passed, she was empty in the way that precedes being filled. She looked at the photograph again. You are more than this house. Don't let anyone make you small. This will not be how my story ends, she said. Not loudly, not dramatically, just firmly. The way you say something to yourself when you need to hear it in your own voice. Then she folded the photograph carefully, put it in the bag, and went to sleep. Eliano Grant's shop was in a street behind the textile market, between a hair attachments wholesaler and a generator repair workshop. The signboard was modest. Eliano Grant Tailoring and Design. The inside was immaculate, bolts of fabric stacked with military precision, a long cutting table, 3 industrial machines, 2 apprentices who moved with the focused quiet of people working under someone who did not tolerate waste. Bianca had heard about Eliano from a fabric supplier she had dealt with in her reselling days. Eliano Grant trained girls, more precisely, Eliano Grant transformed girls, took them in with skills in various states of development and returned them to the world as people who understood not just how to sew, but how a business worked, how a client thought, how excellence was built and sustained and charged for appropriately. She was also, by reputation, extremely difficult to approach. Bianca knocked on the workshop door on a Wednesday morning with no appointment and no referral. Eliana looked up from a cutting table where she was working with chalk and a long ruler and said without stopping, "I'm not taking apprentices." "I'm not asking to be an apprentice," Bianca said. "I'm asking for work, any work. I'll wash plates, sweep, carry fabric, whatever you need done." Eliana did not look up. "I have people for that. I'll do it for less." A pause in the chalk movement. Eliana looked up. She had the kind of face that had seen many things and been impressed by fewer over time. Not unkind, but precise. She looked at Bianca the way she probably looked at fabric, for quality, for structure, for what would hold under pressure. "Why?" Eliana said. Bianca thought about giving a polished answer, then she said the true one. "Because I need to be around excellence while I rebuild. I don't have the option of being around less." Eliana was quiet for a moment. "Come back tomorrow at 6 a.m. she said. "If you are not here at 6 a.m., don't come back at all." Bianca was there at 5:45. She washed plates for 2 weeks. She swept the workshop and the steps and the gutter in front of the shop. She carried bolts of fabric from the supplier's truck without being asked. She ran errands at the pace that nobody asked her to run them at. She watched everything, the way Eliana cut, the way the apprentices handled seam allowances, the way Eliana spoke to clients on the phone, the way she priced, the way she declined work that was not the right fit without apology. In the third week, one of the apprentices was sick. A client was due for a consultation, and there was a sample that needed hand finishing. By noon, Eliana was already on her feet with a deadline somewhere else. She looked around the workshop, looked at Bianca carrying a bolt of lace and said, can you hand finish? Yes, Bianca said. Show me your hands. Bianca held them out. Eliana looked at her fingers the way a musician looks at someone else's hands, reading history. Finish the sample, Eliana said. If it is not right, I will know. It was right. Eliana stood over the finished hem for a long time. She turned it. She held it to the light. She ran her thumb along the inside seam. Then she looked at Bianca. Where did you learn? Myself, Bianca said. I'm watching people better than me. Eliana made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Machine or hand preference? Both equally, but I think in hand. Eliana set the sample down. Tomorrow, you are on machines. We will see what both equally means in practice. It meant what Bianca said it meant. Within 2 months, she was no longer washing plates. Within 4 months, she was handling junior clients independently. Within 8 months, Eliana had given her a key to the workshop, a formal apprenticeship stipend, and access to the business accounts, not to manage them, but to study them. Because Eliana had decided that whatever she was building with this girl required Bianca to understand every layer of how a fashion business sustained itself. They did not discuss this explicitly. Eliana was not a woman who announced her investments. She simply expanded Bianca's access incrementally, as Bianca demonstrated that expanded access would not be wasted. Bianca understood what was happening. She did not take it for granted for a single day. Meanwhile, overseas, things were happening that Bianca only learned about gradually, in pieces, through the careful network of compound gossip that traveled even across distance. Vanessa had arrived with Bianca's documents. She had enrolled in the program with Bianca's name on the original acceptance, impossible to sustain, practically speaking, and it hadn't been. The program administrators had discovered the discrepancy within the first 2 months. Vanessa had been removed without qualification. She stayed abroad because Veronica had sent her money. Then, because she had found unstable casual work. Then, because she was not too proud and too frightened to come home to what coming home would require her to admit. She lost 3 jobs in 2 years. She lived in 3 different shared apartments in 8 months. She accumulated a slow grinding exhaustion that beautiful charismatic people are particularly unprepared for. The kind that comes from consistently performing a version of yourself that is not load-bearing. The real Vanessa, the one underneath the charisma and the shortcuts, had never been built for sustained difficulty. She had never needed to be. There had always been a mother to call, a situation to be managed, someone to absorb the consequences. Abroad, alone, with none of those buffers, she began to understand. In the slow, unpleasant way understanding comes when it is not chosen. What it costs to live without the discipline she had spent years envying in Bianca from a careful distance. Back home, Veronica was managing, barely. Richard's health had been declining quietly for 2 years. The income Bianca had contributed, which Veronica had never fully acknowledged, was gone, and its absence was architectural. The fabric business Bianca had run from the compound had been her own, and it left with her. The grocery budget, stretched by Bianca's management, now contracted to its natural, unprofessional shape. The compound looked slightly less kempt. Small things, but accumulating. Veronica did not suffer dramatically. She was still organized for dramatic suffering, but she aged in the way people age, when the structure they built on someone else's foundation begins slowly to show the stress. 5 years after the morning Bianca walked out of the compound, Bianca Cole Atelier was not large, it was not flashy. It occupied a proper commercial space on a good street in Enugu's GRA, with a reception area, 3 fitting rooms, a main workshop, and a small training room where Bianca ran a monthly intensive for young women who could not afford commercial apprenticeship fees. The waiting list for a consultation was currently 11 weeks. She had 4 full-time staff, 2 part-time, and 1 apprentice she was quietly training the way Eliana had trained her. Through expansion of assets and graduated responsibility and the occasional short, precise observation that reoriented everything. She dressed simply. She drove a modest car. She charged appropriately for her work, not inflated, not discounted. Clients who came expecting to negotiate left having not negotiated. Clients who came expecting to be made to feel small left feeling instead that they had been seen accurately. Eliana Grant came for tea on Fridays when she was in town. She sat in the reception chair and looked around the space with the particular satisfaction of someone observing evidence of an investment correctly made. She never said she was proud. She said things like, "That window placement was a good decision, and your pricing structure is maturing," which from Eliana was the same thing as being proud. Bianca was not happy in the way happiness is portrayed. Effusive, surface level, continuous. She was content in the deeper, more structural way. She knew what she had built. She knew what it cost and she knew it was hers, not contingent on anyone's goodwill, not dependent on anyone's silence. Hers. She still had the photograph of her mother in her bag, every bag she had owned since. It moved with her the way some things do, not as relics, but as orientation. They came on a Thursday. Bianca was in the back workshop, reviewing a bridal order, when her receptionist Ngozi appeared in the doorway with an expression that contained the question she did not know how to ask. There are two women in reception, Ngozi said. They don't have an appointment. The older one says, she is the boss. Careful. Family. Bianca set down the other sheet. Give me a moment, she said. She took a moment, not to compose herself, she was already composed, but because some moments deserve a breath before you walk into them. She walked to the reception. Veronica had aged the way proud women age when life stops cooperating. Not badly, but visibly, the effort of maintaining the presentation now showing in the presentation itself. She was well dressed, but in last year's fabric. Her makeup was careful, but applied with a slightly excessive deliberateness of someone compensating for what wasn't underneath. Vanessa was thinner, quieter than Bianca had ever seen her. She was sitting with her hands in her lap, not performing anything, which was itself the most dramatic change. Vanessa without performance was barely recognizable. What was left was younger, more uncertain, almost unexpectedly sympathetic. They both saw Bianca at the same moment. Veronica looked at the framed name on the wall, Bianca Cole Atalia, and then at the staff moving purposefully behind the reception desk, and then at the fitting room door, where a client was being attended, and then at the way Ngozi had stepped slightly to the side, and the manner of staff who had learned to defer, and something moved across her face that she could not entirely prevent. Vanessa looked at her stepsister's face, then she looked at the floor. Bianca, Veronica began, in a voice tuned to warmth. It's so good to see. What do you need? Bianca said. Not coldly, not loudly, simply, precisely. The way Eliano asked questions she already knew the partial answer to. Veronica's warm voice recalibrated. We've had a difficult time. Vanessa's situation abroad, it didn't work out the way we hoped, and your father's health. The costs have been significant. We thought. She looked around the Atalia again, the assessment briefly visible before she covered it. Family should support each other. Silence. Vanessa's hands tightened in her lap. She looked up. Her eyes were wet, not performed wet, genuinely wet. She said quietly, Bianca, I know She stopped. Started again. There is nothing I can say that covers it. I know that. I'm not pretending there is. Bianca looked at her stepsister. She thought about the drawer, the envelope, the empty room, the leaking ceiling, the 6,000 naira, the photograph on the damp floor. The 5 years. She let herself think about it fully, not to fuel anything, but because it deserved to be held rather than managed. Then she said, I'm not giving you money. Veronica straightened. Bianca, we are family. I'm not giving you money, Bianca said again, the same tone, unbothered. She looked toward Ngozi. Is the washing area backed up? Ngozi, who had been watching with the stillness of someone recording history, said, Yes, ma, since this morning. The post-fitting cleanup and the fabric prep for Saturday's order. Bianca nodded. She looked back at Veronica and Vanessa. There is work, she said. Washing. Scrubbing the workstations. Sorting the fabric off cuts. It takes approximately 4 hours. When it is done, you will be paid for the work. She paused. It is honest pay for honest work. The reception was very quiet. Veronica's face moved through several things rapidly. Indignation, calculation, and underneath both, something that might have been the beginning of a recognition she was not yet ready to complete. Vanessa stood up first. She did not look at her mother. She looked at Bianca. Where is the washing area? She said. Bianca held her gaze for a moment. Then she said, Ngozi will show you. Veronica stood last. She did not speak. She walked behind Ngozi with her head at the same careful angle she had always used. But the angle now cost something. You could see it costing. Bianca went back to the workshop. She did not watch them walk. She did not walk past the washing area to observe. She continued reviewing the bridal order, answered a supplier's call, approved a fabric choice for a client consultation, discussed Saturday's timeline with her senior seamstress. She ran her business. In the late afternoon, Ngozi appeared in the workshop doorway again. They finished everything. Check it, Bianca said. Ngozi came back 10 minutes later. It's done properly. Bianca opened the small drawer of her work desk. She took out an envelope. She had prepared it before walking to reception because she had understood from the moment Ngozi described the two women what this day was, and she walked to the reception area. They were sitting again. Vanessa's blouse had a watermark on the sleeve. Veronica's wrapper had a fabric stain across the hem that would not come out easily. Both of them looked not broken, not destroyed, but rearranged, as if several hours of labor had moved things inside them that had been sitting in the wrong position for a long time. Bianca placed the envelope on the table. "This is payment for today's work," she said. "Transport and food." Veronica looked at the envelope. She looked at her stepdaughter's face, calm, unreadable, in the way still water is unreadable, not empty but deep. She opened her mouth, then she closed it. Vanessa picked up the envelope. She held it for a moment, then she said, so quietly it was almost below hearing, "She would be proud of you, your mother." Bianca was still for 1 second. Then she said, "I know." She walked them to the door herself, not to escort them, to close the day properly, the way you close a good sentence with intention. She stood at the entrance of her Talia and watched them walk away down the street in the early evening, early light. Her stepmother and her stepsister carrying an envelope of honest wages, walking away from the name on the wall that had been built from everything they thought they had taken from her. Then she went back inside. There was still work to finish before Saturday. There was always still work, and she had never been afraid of work. It was, after all, the only thing in her life that had never let her down. Some people take your door believing they've taken your destination. They haven't. They've only made you build a better one. If you follow this story to the end, I truly appreciate you. Please take a moment to subscribe and join our growing family of story lovers. And before you go, there's another beautiful story on your screen right now. Go ahead and watch. I promise it is worth your time. Thank you.